There are three different types of go-kart suspensions. There's the parallelogram system, and my pen's not working. Parallelogram system, where you have two parallel arms which go up and down, and then your tire or whatever is mounted onto the component. Shock absorber typically is mounted on the bottom, or it could be mounted on the top, and that is called the parallelogram system. The second suspension system that is used on a go-kart typically is the go-kart will look like this, and then in the back it will be hinged, and you'll have a shock that will come up and be something like this, and the back end will be adjustable, kind of move up and down like that, and the engine will be in there and so on, and that whole back end is independent system. The third system is a single trailing arm, which is pretty simple. It's basically this is your front end component, tire on it, and then it basically has just an arm with a shock absorber mounted off of that. And it can go all the way across the front of the go-kart, or it can be just off the front. The fourth system, which is very widely used on most go-karts, is a spindle system that looks like this, and then a spring will be mounted in the top section and will give you some suspension. The biggest part that most people have is the difficulty of this rear section, and so they usually use the parallelogram system, which is pretty complex actually for doing suspension in the rear. Next time we'll discuss an alternative which is a little bit more simple. While we're talking suspensions, we're going to talk about drive systems and how they are designed. You will notice that a lot of four-wheelers will have suspensions that seem to be pretty simple. It's just a chain that goes around the back end, and then there's like an arm that comes up and mounts into the framework, and then off of there is a shock arm. Well, you can design a go-kart rear suspension like that. Here's the wheel. However, one of the things you have to understand is that the chain will change length if you alter the position of the rotational part of the sprockets from being on the center line of the trailing arm. Motorcycles can get away with that. If you ever take a look at a motorcycle, it'll have something a little bit similar. What they try to do is they try to get the trailing arm as close as possible to where the output shaft is on the gearbox. So they put like a little tensioner system right here that they use to keep the chain, at least when it gets flexed, from getting too short or too long. What'll happen is when you go up, the chain will get too short. When it get too long. When you go down, the chain will get too short. This is a particular suspension system which is useful for solid axle go-karts. Basically what you have is an axle which your tire will mount on, and then you have a parallel system that the shaft rides in. This part right here is mounted to the framework, and then what you do, the shaft goes all the way through and across, or it doesn't have to. But anyway, what you do, the tire will obviously mount on here. But right here you take shock absorber material, or like a shock cord, and you wrap it around it. Shock cord, wrap it around here. And what it does is allows the suspension to travel up and down in this parallel track, and you can cap it off so it doesn't go past travel. Now, one of the downsides with this particular suspension system, when you have a drive sprocket driving this area, is that the chain length, as we had talked about before, will get shorter. Well, to take care of that, put in a chain tensioner so that when the suspension goes up and down, you have a little chain tensioner which moves with it. You put a little spring on it, mount it like that. You can use a roller skate if you want. That works fine with a roller skate wheel. And just use your simple suspension system, and you'll have a suspension system for the rear. You can also do the same thing for the front. You can use a parallel track, and instead of having a shaft, you'll have here's your front spindle area. And I'm drawing it terrible. But anyway, it looks like this, and then your spindle mounts in here. This pipe, or this square tube, goes through the two here and runs parallel in there, and then you just strap it around with some shock cord. So to recap, basically there are 4 different types of suspension systems. You have the parallelogram system, you have the trailing arm system, you have the side or cross trailing arm system, and then you have the suspension which runs in a track, or what I call the free track system. That is your 4th system. Now, all go-karts can have a combination of suspensions. For example, this is a typical go-kart layout. You'll have the person driving in this area right here, but in the back you may have a independent 4-wheel suspension, and in the front you may have a trailing link system. It just depends on how you want this go-kart to perform best. Nice drawing here. Okay. Put a nice big engine in there, and voila, off we go. Well, as you have seen before, you could have a go-kart which is divided and has no suspension in the front. That's perfectly acceptable. But in the back, it hinges, and the whole back end moves around. You can have a combination of where there is a suspension with the trailing arm in the front, where the back end bounces up and down. You can have an A-frame system in the front. It's your choice of what you want to do. The most cost-effective, probably the cheapest go-kart suspension system is just this, where you have the whole back end being a trailing arm system and no suspension in the front.